Terrillian, Chapter 3, The Fall of Kraith. Seeing the wonders of his creation and how he was in a weakened state after completing his designs, Terrillian allowed greed to embody her being. In one motion, she stole his power, struck Kraith down from the heavens, and tossed him to his beloved world below, with the curse of bile upon her lips. He fell with the force of a star and struck the world he had so lovingly wrought into existence. With a mighty blow, that blow shaking the planet and setting into motion all the events to follow. The force of Kraith's fall stunned the planet. His body hurled through the outer shell of the planet, leaving a gash that stretched across a third of its surface, and he came to rest inside the second layer. Ash and stone filled the skies, falling like tears crashing down. Grieving the fall of its creator, the world of Terrillian wept. The life that was, now reduced to dust, rained down upon the world, hiding its life-giving sun and casting it into years of mournful shadow. As the ash fell, Kraith, the mighty maker, gasped his last blood-choked breath, cursing his bride for what she had done. Terrillian, still reveling in her own glory, reached out amongst the stars like a cancer, her touch rotting each star into nothingness to feed her ever-growing hunger, leaving behind the planet of her namesake as a trophy to showcase. As a rattling echo of Kraith's last breath fell silent, so began the years of ash and slow decomposition of his body, like a masterfully crafted sword giving into ever-grasping rust. Hi, welcome to the Terrillian podcast, set deep in the mind of our creator, where we discuss a comprehensive analysis of the planet known as Terrillian. I'm one of your hosts and all-around book nerd, Beard. I am joined with the creator of Terrillian, the madman and genius, Ian.
That's me.
I'm also joined with Chris, our music producer and media manager.
Yes, sir.
Also, we have our ever-silent Marina, who's sitting in on this podcast, and she is the other half to all of our brains.
All right, so why did Kraith not foresee this? If he's so powerful, why was this allowed?
So for him, I mean, it was primarily just one of those things where he was in love. He made something that he loved so much so that he created Terrillian for her. And in that, he overlooked pretty much those kind of things. He didn't even notice them.
I'm trying to think of an example with other forms of literature that would be a good example of that.
I mean, there's a song, I think it's called Love is Blindness. Yeah, there is a song, yeah.
By whom?
I don't remember, but it was on The Great Gatsby.
Oh, okay.
Cool. Influences from everywhere, huh?
Yeah. But no, I mean, it is one of those things. It is a big blinder. I mean, there's a lot of sadness to that. It's kind of what I was going for, just to kind of show that even though it was so apparent that she truly hated him, he just was so in love with her that he just didn't even pick it up.
What was it? Would you say that it was hate, or she just cared more about his power than she did him?
I think it was more like she cared more about herself and seeing herself in a certain light, and being, juxtaposition of someone as powerful as Kraith. What was jealousy and envy eventually just kind of turned itself into hate, enough hate to strike him down for an act of love too.
Obviously, we read what her actions were and how she stole his power. But would you say that her actions were a more meditated effort, or was Terrillian more of a, here's my opportunity, I'm just going to take my opportunity?
Yeah, like did she have a plan, or was this just the spur of the moment kind of thing?
That's one of the things that I've gone back and forth on for a long time with it, because when I originally designed this, it was supposed to be as a mythos, and like you hear in Greek mythoses with their gods and how all that stuff plays out, you can have like 5 different stories to the same thing. And that's kind of what I lean towards. So I did have like 3 different variations of it, where one was like methodically plotted, and she planned to have him create this planet, for the exact reason of trying to basically take over and kill him. And
because
then
it would wear him out, right? All this
because
ultimate power of creating this planet.
draining him out would be the only way she could even put up, or go against him in any capacity. They were just so he was just so beyond her as far as strength. So the only way she could get a leg up in that fight would be draining him out. So, and my idea was I had one where she would, bequest him to make something, and in that scenario he had a scepter or his like magical staff that essentially would be a part of him, and that thing would allow him to create all these great wonders without, burning him out. So she requests him to make this planet. And then she says, do not use your staff. Like, I want this to be a labor of love. How can you show me love if it's
Prove
so
yourself.
easy? Exactly.
Yeah.
Prove yourself. So it's like, if it's so easy for you to make this with your staff, show me how much you love me by creating this without it. And in so doing, this was the more methodical one where she plotted this out. He separates himself from his staff, makes a planet, and by the time he's completed, he's exhausted. At that point, she takes the staff and then takes him out.
Which is great, but that's obviously not exactly what we were going for with that chapter I just read.
Yeah, so this was more like, you have the canonized chapter, which was what was read by Beard. And then you have kind of the different variations and nuances that I put to it as far as like the different ways it can come out. Because at the end of the day, it is designed to be a game.
Different flavors.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where I wanted it to be a little skewed. I wanted it not to be so cookie cutter. I didn't want there to be an exact answer. I wanted it to be more like, you get at either way I've written it, you get that Terrillian's the bad guy and she has done this horrible thing. But how she goes about doing it, I wanted it to be skewed because I didn't want for a piece of history to be at the beginning of time to this point.
Yeah, because you just look at any form of history book, and the further you go back, the less sure we become.
Exactly.
Well, it's based on your perspective, right? Like, whose perspective is this from? So is that kind of tying into this game then, that you're getting this story heard from different people, and they may put a spin on it or something, right? They're telling a tale of how it actually happened.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're looking at it from his descendants, which we will go into a little bit more in podcast 3, but when you look at it from his descendant line, it is a story that was verbally communicated first and then slowly spread out amongst his people. It wasn't something that, anybody physically saw. But again, we'll get into that a little more in chapter 3.
Okay. Well, I guess just my last point on this then, it kind of sounds like it was planned, right? It was intentional. So can you tell me a little bit more about the plan? Like, is it she really wanted this planet to rule this planet? Like, was this all thought out? Or was this more like, from her perspective, she's just taking it one step at a time? She just wants to overcome.
She wants to be not subservient to anyone. So for her, being under someone is something that she cannot handle. She wants to be the only and the highest point of authority. And having someone like Kraith in the picture where, again, like I said before, she's just completely outmatched. She doesn't have any other options. So the methodical side of it is the one that I always kind of thought would ring the most true, because otherwise there really wouldn't be a way for her to take over. There has to be some level of betrayal that she actually thinks this through. Having it just like a spur of the moment type thing, it is a good idea, but I did want it to be a little more thorn to it. I wanted it to be a little more like she genuinely wanted him gone and hated him enough and had enough jealousy and envy to where she thought it out. So that's kind of where I stood on it, but I like to keep it a little murky there because I don't want there to be such a canon history.
Brilliant. No, I like it. So, also want to ask, what form of Kraith's power did Terrillian try to take?
So I did come up with a couple of those. One would be his staff, which I kind of referenced earlier. the source of his power would be his staff, and she took that, overthrew him, and then with it she essentially started, reaping the ability to create. So she started ripping apart everything he made, kind of like a kid throwing a tantrum, just destroying everything else. But the other side of that coin was she essentially took his place. Without the strongest being in the world, you're the next strongest person. You are in charge of everything. So the power that she took wasn't necessarily a physical manifestation of power as much as it was a title of power. Because at that point, she became the highest and most powerful being around.
Even if undeserving.
And then there's a reference in the story where they talk about him cursing her. Well, he curses her in the sense that she can't really take on the planet because of his bloodline being there. Which, we'll go into a little bit more again in chapter 3. There's a lot going on in that chapter. But Backstory, yeah. But it is one of those things where essentially he going to that planet, he didn't necessarily have to curse her. She ended up cursing herself. When she was with him, she was sustained by him. And now you'll see as she goes out, she starts feeding on everything around her. Starts feeding on the planets, the stars, to try to help.
She takes life.
Starts taking, exactly. She basically becomes this black hole where she's constantly in a state of feeding to maintain.
Now, I know you love Lord of the Rings, and you reference the Silmarillion a lot in regards to this lore that we're reading through now. Did you have... Because, listening to you talk about how she starts feeding on the stars and soaking it all in, did you have the character of Ungoliant in mind from the Silmarillion when you were creating this character?
Yeah, a little bit. An idea where...
I see a smile.
Yeah, a little bit. Mongolian is honestly one of the coolest creatures, in my opinion. The fact that she doesn't come... I don't know if anybody listening is a Lord of the Rings fan, or much less read the Silmarillion. But essentially, to give you her story, she basically came from nothing. She wasn't made by the deity of the Tolkien's universe. She came from blackness. She's hunger herself. That was her character. And she embodied a spider because that was what was fitting to her. But just a crazy, interesting character.
And it had no satiation to her hunger.
None.
And that's honest. I get such a feel of that from Terrillian as well. She sees, like you were talking earlier, how she doesn't want anything above her. She wants to have it all for herself. And she has this insatiable hunger.
Kind of like with Mongolian,
yeah.
And when she takes on the I think they're called the Cimmerals. When she starts eating the Cimmerals from
well, she ate the 2 trees.
She ate the 2 trees, and then she tried to eat the Cimmerals, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, no, Tolkien, absolute beast.
Yeah.
So I actually just want to jump in then. So you talked a lot so far about Terrillian, the person. Mm-hmm. But can you go in a little more depth about the planet itself? So Beard read a line about how when Kraith got thrown to the planet, he crashed through the outer shell and he landed on that second shell. And I know you kind of talked about in the last podcast how the planet is multi-tiered, but can you kind of talk a little bit more about that, the tieredness of the planet? Because it kind of talks about it in this one, but just a little bit more on that.
Yeah, so the planet itself, as we kind of touched on chapter 1, and essentially how it was layered, I put it in a series to where I could develop a lot of different cultures in different pockets to where they're separated from each other from this multi-layered planet. But the idea of a god like Kraith crashing to the planet, and keep in mind that this character, this god, is much larger than the average person. I mean, we're talking, it would be like a I couldn't even describe his true size. The creature itself of Kraith, that character, is just massive. So it's like a gigantic star. I mean, for lack of a better word, it's like a crater hitting this planet. And throughout this planet, it's pocketed with these layers, and it has these huge underground biomes. And there's thin points in that. So when Kraith's body hits that planet's surface, not only does it cause massive devastation from just the pure heat of something like that coming in through the atmosphere, but you have just the sheer weight of his body times the velocity of the speed coming down. So this giant man is basically burning a rut across the entire face of Terrillian, and finally his body hits that soft point in Terrillian's shell and breaks deeper into the planet. which is also kind of perfect because I didn't really want there to be oh, there he is, let's just follow the giant meteor, scratch across the planet. There's where Kraith's body is. I wanted it to be something that we could, over time, kind of hide away, tuck it away, and build off of what comes from that, which again will be kind of touched on with his descendants.
Is that crater always there, or does the planet try to cover it a little bit with vegetation, or is it just death in that area?
Well, as the planet kind of heals and goes through that state of mourning where the planet's basically recovering from everything, it does kind of overcover everything, just like anything with history. I mean, you have these great pyramids that were built by, the Aztecs, and they're eventually covered by vegetation, so much so that you couldn't even see where they were to begin with. And so something like that, where you had this huge rut that was made by this colossal hit over time, and there's going to be a lot of time that transpires between, in my idea where it's a game, the game character comes into play, there's been several thousands of years that have transpired since.
Give me another visual. Is this like a moon hitting this planet? How big is this? Is it like... It sounds like this massive crater, it's going through 2 layers of this planet, right? Is it dragging across the planet, or is it just a solid hit?
It's more like a solid... It's a drag across, like it's like a lateral hit to the planet, but enough to where it's kind of at an angle, kind of like driving a screw into a flat piece of wood at an angle, to where it hits, drags, and then deepens.
Okay. Straight shot.
Yeah, and like for comparison of scale for Kraith, would you say that he is the size of like the Empire State Building? Or bigger?
Maybe a little bit smaller than the Empire State Building, but still pretty heavy and dense.
Is his face the size of the Mount Rushmore faces?
a little smaller than that,
okay.
But the thing about him is he is a god, so the way his body is composed, for example, things with weight can make a much larger dent if they were dropped into our atmosphere, right?
So he's just a big, hefty guy. You got mountain face, and you got a building for a body.
A building for a body,
but
and mountain
for
a face.
But he is built.
He's built, and not to mention he's made of super dense stuff. Okay. So the way I saw it would be like, it would take like his hand maybe like the size of a house or something, hypothetically, right? So his hand's like the size of a house, and you'd be like, okay, well, it would take X amount of things to lift this house off the ground. Well, it would take like Superman plus a couple other Supermen to lift his hand off the ground because of how heavy he is and how dense he is. There's a star.
Is this material? Is this rare material that can be acquired in the game?
It becomes a material over time, yes, but access to it is next to like impossible to get at it. Where it's located, and that's kind of one of the things, it becomes kind of the, I wouldn't say the holy grail of locations, but kind of like the whole story with the Ark of the Covenant, where it's like, everybody knows that it happened and existed, but nobody knows where it's at. That's the same thing. It's this ultimate powerful force that nobody knows where it is, and the people who do know where it is obviously aren't talking about it.
They tell the tale, but they don't go and,
Yeah, they won't mess with it, they don't talk about it, and it stays buried.
Well, and I have a follow-up question then on his impact, because I know how I've imagined it in my mind. But you say that he, using the example of the screw, which is a great example, does the impact trail go underneath the surface then and continue before breaking down, or is the pit open to the air all the way until
like a
it falls
canyon?
through? Yeah, is it a canyon or is it more like a cave?
It's kind of like, yeah, I would say more cave style, like kind of the hole going down, and eventually as his body's just blowing through the crust of the planet, he enters a pocket.
Right.
And that's kind of the final resting place where he finally hits something that's dense enough to hold his weight, and he stays.
Okay.
And at that point, the remaining pocket itself is just a solid hole through the shell. And then over time, things collapse, things bury, and then it's kind of his perfect resting place.
Okay.
So looking at this last part in this reading, Terrillian, does she leave? Is she on the planet, or is she off the planet? What is she doing?
She's off the planet. So at this point...
It's her trophy, so she's just leaving it there.
At this point, she looks back at the planet, which is now in this huge ash storm, brought up from this gigantic meteor hitting it, essentially. She looks back at the planet, and it's kind of like, it's named after me. This is where I became God, essentially, for her. So she looks at that planet, and it's this big, shadowy ball of what it used to be, with all this ash that's been kicked up, all this dust, dirt, and debris, that the whole planet is suffering from it. So she looks back, and that's hers. That's her crowning jewel for her, because she's finally the highest authority. And at that point, she's like, this is my world, this is my universe. And she starts going out and basically erasing everything Kraith did and starts to feed herself and grow. So
Off
she
of
goes...
all the surrounding planets, surrounding everything that those planets have to offer, stars, right? She's going after everything.
And if it wasn't for, stuff that we'll discuss in chapter 3, I don't think she ever really would have come back for Terrillian. I think she would have left it as it was. But over time, you consume everything around you. You don't have anything left. You have to go to the one thing that's left, regardless of how important it is to you.
That's interesting. She's going back to her trophy, the last thing, but it's the first thing, right? Full circle.
Full circle with
I
her.
like that. Yeah, that's really good. Cool stuff. With that, we will draw to a close. We do appreciate all of you who have listened to our comprehensive discussion of the planet known as Terrillian. We entice you to listen and learn, following along with each podcast, so that you will visualize the vivid and vast world of Terrillian. A tragic tale set forth for the main protagonist, where you as the gamer would play to conquer lands and legends, thus creating a lore of your own. In doing so, we hope to gain your favor to turn these stories into a video game. If you want to see more content, check out our website at terrilliangaming.com. For more episodes, find us on Spotify and YouTube. Support our emergence.